mentioned OCD in the last video and didn't really talk about it. Kind of felt the energy sort of dissipate, dry up, but I'll just try it out. You know, I can always not upload, or I can always delete the video. And I think, you know, I want to try to draw some connections between OCD, addiction, perfectionism, anxiety, because there's sort of an underlying mechanism behind all of that. And OCD, thinking about it in the context of wanting to share and feeling anxiety around sharing, OCD is very clever. It's a shapeshifter. And it's a contender. It's definitely a contender, not something to be trifled with. Obsessive compulsive disorder, and the name is very apt because there's really two phases, two aspects of it: the obsession and the compulsion. And it comes in a wide variety of themes. It's the word I usually hear people use. Wide variety of flavors. And it is not, so it comes in a variety of flavors. I don't know how much I want to get into the mechanics of it. Well, let's just try it out. So there's the obsessive part, which is, well, no, I'm feeling like I don't want to talk about that. Yeah, so there's the obsessive component, which are thoughts, ruminations, the discursive madness inside one's mind that ramps up anxiety and has a physiological effect that is anxiety, essentially, primarily anxiety. Disturbing thoughts, there's usually a precipitating event, a trigger in the external environment, not always in the external environment, but sometimes it happens internally. But let's say just very basic OCD, to the point that I almost hesitate to use this as an example because it's so stereotypical. And OCD is much more diverse than this, but just to get a handle on the idea of it is the theme of contamination. And so maybe the person that is really struggling with this theme touches something, like right now, just touching my nose even, that could be something that registers in the individual's mind as now their fingers are dirty, that there's a contamination that's happened. And contamination can get a lot more abstract too, but just to keep it kind of simple. And so there's an obsessive, it's like a fixation on that feeling of being unclean, and it might spiral into worries, secondary worries, but there's like this feeling of being unclean, being contaminated. And in order to relieve that feeling, that anxiety that comes from feeling contaminated, one develops, it's like as a life raft into the chaos of the obsessive thinking, obsessive pattern, a life raft comes in and says, here's the way to safety. And that life raft is the compulsive action, which would be, in this case, like washing one's hands, and needing to do it repeatedly. Needing to do it repeatedly. The problem is, I mean, you could kind of look at that. That is maybe not the best example. I'm just trying to give a flavor of it, because obviously, you know, if you do touch something that is dirty, or if you do need to wash your hands, there are obviously times when it's appropriate to wash your hands. But with OCD, it's like it's amplified. It's just, it becomes, the dials on the feeling and the obsession and the need to seek relief are just, the dials on that are just turned up to maximum volume. And with that pattern, you don't get you don't ever, it's essentially, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So it's like the more you feed into the need, the more you feed into the compulsion and the seeking of relief, I feel like I'm way off track here. I almost feel like putting this video up just because it feels so like I'm all over the place. I'm not really being coherent. It's a very imperfect video. It's almost kind of making me want to put it up just as like a therapeutic exposure, but yeah, so there's the two phases, the obsession and the compulsion, the obsession which generates the anxiety, and the compulsion which seeks to relieve it. But much like addiction, this is why I kind of want to try to draw some connections here. Much like I almost think of OCD as a category of addiction. They just share so many features in common that it almost feels like it's a category of a larger, there are subsets of a larger phenomenon that's happening. But it's like an inwardly coiling spiral, becomes a kind of enslavement, to put it in a kind of dramatic way, because the OCD process offers relief, but and it provides temporary relief. That's what's so fucked up about it and dangerous, is you can actually get the relief. And these obsessions, from very kind of straightforward, I don't want to say quite trivial, but things like contamination and needing to wash your hands, to more abstract things, just look up a list of OCD themes. They run the gamut, but it can be so utterly disabling and overwhelming and life deranging that it's like I say, it's a force to deal with. But the danger and kind of the trap of it is that you can get momentarily relief by doing the compulsion. So there is kind of a logic to doing it, at least in the short term, and much the same with addiction. But especially, I guess this is where I was going with that, is especially because the themes can come to take such power and such control over one's life that you can get trapped in an obsessive quagmire. It's funny, the words that your mind throws up. An obsessive loop. You can get trapped in that, and just the quality of your life just deteriorates, and you can only take so much. You can depending on the depth of the OCD, how much influence those patterns have in your life, it can really deteriorate the quality of your life to a very significant degree, and your functionality. It's frightening, really, how much power it can have. Ultimately, it does not have the power. That's the good news. Ultimately, you're in charge, and it's important part of working through that is to say fuck you to the OCD, basically. But it's not easy. It's not always straightforward, because it shape shifts and it can mutate and go into different directions. But but if you're stuck in one of these obsessive cycles and you're just watching your life fall apart, and sometimes I've had experiences with it, of it going on for days, weeks, months, and you just want relief. And it's like, you can be a really strong individual, can be definitely a really intelligent individual. I think a lot of intelligent people struggle with OCD, but you can also just be somebody who's really strong, has a lot of willpower, determination, and it just can eventually just kind of erode and erode and erode until you sort of give in to the compulsion. The compulsion comes in initially like, here's your way out, here's the relief, but then you realize it's like you've got you're being given an ultimatum, you've got a gun to your back, sort of, and you feel like this is never going to end. That's one of the things the OCD is really famous for saying. Or, this is the last time, just do it this one last time, and then you'll be clear of this and we won't have to deal with it. So eventually, for any variety of reasons, but often just through exhaustion, you give in to the compulsion, and it just reinforces the cycle. I guess that's the simple way to say it, is that it reinforces the cycle. But much like addiction, not only does it reinforce it, it magnifies it, it amplifies it, it amps it up. And you just cede more and more control of your life over to the pattern. That is the human condition, I'm convinced. Not OCD exactly, but that pattern. And you see it repeated with addiction as well, is you're looking for relief. Ultimately, you're looking for safety on maybe an even more just fundamental, physiological, biological level. You're contending with your nervous system on some level, and all the anxiety and stuff that you've got going on inside, the repressed material, all the undigested, unintegrated experiences and pain and grief and loneliness and anger, etc., buried in your nervous system, buried in the various layers of creation, the various layers of your being, but your nervous system mediates that to some degree. And so with addiction, more classically speaking about addiction, like alcoholism, drug use, but sex addiction, pornography, addicted to scrolling, addicted to relationships, addicted to work, all the different exercise, whatever it is, there is a seeking of safety that's happening. But similar to with OCD and doing a compulsion, with addiction, you could sort of draw the parallel and just say, it may just be the exact same thing, but very close parallel with addiction is you've got the sort of anxiety of all the yuck, all the gunk inside of you, and a way to deal with that and to find relief and to feel wholeness. It's like the alcohol comes in, or the porn, or the relationship, or whatever the addictive pattern or habit comes in, and it says, here's your way out. And just like with OCD, you can intellectually understand this is not ultimately going to solve the problem. But when you're miserable and you've got the gun to your back of suffering, and you've got this, you've got access to a means of bringing some relief, it seems pretty straightforward why we would choose that. But just like with OCD, you reinforce the pattern the more you do it. The constriction and the control that the addiction has over your life, it just tightens, takes more control, and I think bulimia and anorexia, eating disorders, I think those are kind of under the umbrella of anxiety disorders. And I think there's a similar thing happening there, a wanting, maybe with bulimia, a wanting to feel empty and to feel clean. I think I've heard it described. I can relate to that with OCD. It's like you want to clear these gross feelings out. You want to clear that feeling of contamination. You just want to get it the fuck out. Or, like with, let's say, I think there's other themes that touch on it. But yeah, just that feeling of wanting to get relief, wanting to be empty, wanting to be clear. And I wish it was that simple. I wish it was as simple as doing that compulsion and the kingdom of heaven would dawn. But it's a counterfeit intervention. It's a mirage. And so the answer, the healing to it, goes back to just the basics, which is sitting in the fire. I mean, that's the direct route. If you're desperate enough, if you've got enough desire for it, just sitting in the fire. Because these patterns the patterns want to perpetuate themselves. It's like they feed off of momentum. And so the more momentum you can give them, the more you play into them, the more you feed them, the more life, the more sustenance they have. But their whole game falls apart the moment you refuse to play. But you will pay a price. You're already paying a price, and so you could say, comparatively, you're going to pay a much smaller price, but up front, it's going to be painful, because you're taking away the fuel, you're taking away the food for that pattern to perpetuate itself. And it's like, it's a death. Those patterns die. They have to die. And so you can expect it to be intense and for it to burn, but the way out is just to stop. As simple as that. It's not easy, but it is that simple. You just stop. And you sit in the fire. You're running from a wildfire right now. It's like you're throwing fuel to it and running from it, trying to escape it. And then at some point, you turn and you face it, and you burn. You you sit in the fire. And so that's with OCD. There are lesser, that's kind of the gold standard direct path. The no bullshit, just straight path is just surrender. Kill me if you will to the patterns. They're gonna threaten you, they're gonna be angry, they're gonna ramp up their intensity, they're gonna do whatever they can. The OCD or the addictions can do whatever it can to get you to continue to feed it. And so your job is to say, well, you're welcome to say that, you're welcome to be here, you're welcome to rage and throw mud and be angry, and no, and the answer is still no. You're welcome to kill me, ultimately. You have to be willing to say that. You have to be willing to die to the pattern, die to the die to it. Not actual death, but it may feel really awful. You have to just, maybe I don't want to say it that strongly. I don't know. But you have to be willing to feel whatever comes up. You have to be willing to feel whatever comes up. And I've already kind of gone into that in previous videos about how you transmute it, how you alchemize or digest that material as it comes up. Trying to think where this all started on this video was, me thinking about, and so I am feeling a lot of anxiety about doing this and trying to sort through it and see if there's something useful, if it's an anxiety to be I'm sort of just in a phase of trying to figure out if this is healthy or not. Because I can already feel and see how making videos can be a kind of compulsion also, and reinforce unhealthy habits. I hope not. I hope it's not. Yeah. I think it's always going to be somewhat mixed motivations, and I think that's okay. I'm hoping it is. And if not, I'll just delete. I'll just erase the videos, and ultimately getting healthy is what matters. But